All right, I'm Desmond,
I'm Matthias.
I'm Massimo.
and this is our podcast about the two popes. So I just wanted to start off this discussion by asking guys what were your overall thoughts about the movie.
Yeah, I thought the movie was really interesting because we know it's based on a true story, so it's interesting about how these events unfolded in real life. It also kind of gives us a perspective on what happens like within the church authority. Since we are just people who really attend church and don't really get to see what happens like within the walls of the church that often, it's kind of interesting to get like a new perspective on things like that.
Yeah, I thought it was like really interesting as well. I thought the person that played Pope Francis did like a really good. The person that played Pope Benedict did a really good job, and like near the end, where he was like confessing to Pope Francis about like his faults as a person. Like I really thought that was interesting. It's like to me a pope is almost like a perfect person, and like to really like humanize popes and show them that like they're perfect, like just like us. I thought that was like really like captivating moment for me.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway I had was how modern the topic felt. Like when you learn about church history, you kind of think to yourself, "Wow, this was in the past." You don't really think about how it relates to you, but watching this movie, I felt like a connection to it because of how modern it felt in itself. So I think that kind of that ties into the first question. The first question I think is how the church deals with scandals in itself. So I just want to see how the movie spoke to you about that.
Okay. Yeah, there was obviously a scandal going on in the church, like for the time of this movie, and I thought it was interesting, like how everyone was trying to conceal it, like in a way, and kind of like to like forget about it, and like that grief really caught up to Pope Benedict, like in the end, like in that confession scene that he had with Francis. So I feel like the church. And like in the movie, like obviously, like they're trying to like move away from scandal and like embrace the good. But I think that the movie was really calling us to revisit our demons.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the entire thing that Matthias said about how we see the popes as like these perfect figures, but then we kind of get to see them and how they actually deal with like crises, like these scandals. It kind of made it really interesting. It shows that even like in the church, a scandal can be affected. It has to be dealt with. It's not just like something that can go away. So it is interesting to see that the church deals with problems as any sort of community would.
Yeah, I think that kind of what I found from the scandal, how it was dealt with, was kind of like how the church has to move forward and be open and honest about like what's actually going on inside, while still like withholding its reputation as an institution and a belief that is true and we base our lives upon. So kind of it was really interesting to see how the people inside the church and people in the authoritative positions deal with that issue and how they go about it. So I think that kind of ties into second question about the Reformation of the church and how it contrasts to conservatism. And obviously there's two huge kind of opposing views between Francis and Benedict. So I just wanted to see what your guys' kind of opinion was and what spoke out to you about it.
Oh yeah, so Francis is obviously a Jesuit. He's from Argentina, and like the movie makes it clear very on that he's very well liked in Argentina, and Benedict, who's seen as more conservative, gets into a lot of scandals in Rome. And like there was a scene where Jose was speaking to a gardener in the Vatican, and it was showing his humanity. And Benedict was like moved by Francis's reformism when he doesn't require him to to speak Latin, and he's kind of just like brushing it off. So like the influence that Francis had on Pope Benedict was really like interesting for me, and it's like signaling like a lot of change in the church that we see today.
Yeah, I think also reflecting on the past question with that, Benedict early on in the movie, you can see that he was very, very conservative. He didn't even consider reform. He wouldn't even speak to Francis. But after the scandals that did happen, and after Matthias said Pope Francis's influence on him, he began to realize that maybe his ideas weren't the best, and how even just like how a person can, a church can reform in like the people that choose to lead it, and also just what the people that do lead it choose to do. Like in the end, Benedict's choice to step down and allow Pope Francis to become Pope was a very, I think it was a step towards reform in itself, which is very interesting to show like how the church can reform in reaction to something bad.
Yeah, I think that kind of what I took away from it is that the belief, kind of the conservative belief that the church has to be perfect, it has to be completely right. It can only be done through reform, because something that was perfect in the year 1000 obviously isn't going to be perfect now. So kind of the belief that conservatism has to be dealt with reform. So it's kind of contradicting in of itself, and you can kind of see how that plays out with Benedict stepping down from the papal authority. So I kind of think that that kind of ties into the question. Even with arguments over reform and being conservative, how people's relationships inside the church between each other is affected by it, if it is affected at all, and how these relationships also add to the development and in the church. So I think my question is, can you guys discuss like what do you think is the model for interchurch relationships? Kind of speaking about how Bergoglio and Benedict were good friends instead of enemies, even if one was pope and the other lost.
I think that it kind of reflects something that we do know about the church, how the church is meant to be treated kind of like a body, like a community of many people. And just like that, how these differing ideas, the people who have the differing ideas should still be in community together. However, their ideas should also face the same community. Even with like these very opposite views pretty much through the church, it's believed that I think they can come together and they combine. So I believe that the relationship of the church, even with people with many different views, they should always be connected underneath this one similar thing of the church.
Yeah, I like that example they use, like the body, like we're the body of Christ, and a body is made up of a bunch of different parts that all work together. So like the same way that like all the organs in our body work together to make it whole, we should have a lot of church leaders working together to keep our faith whole and to guide everyone in the right path.
Yeah, I think that the scene when Benedict had invited Francis over to his papal vacation house sort of, and Benedict is playing the piano and they're both like sharing a bottle of wine. It's like a symbol of bonding, like even though they have obviously some differences in the way they think that the church should be run. And I think it just speaks to how like the Eucharist in itself is community. The Eucharist is community, and the wine is the portrayal of the blood of Christ, and it's kind of like a connection between the Eucharist and the community inside the church. And I kind of think that it has, and they do talk about in that scene about how their connections to Christ and God, their relationship with God, affects how they run and how they go about working in the church. And I wanted to see if you guys had any ideas about that, or if you think that kind of was just the basis point of what the movie was kind of about.
Yeah, I think that they did both talk about how they've had a lot of difficulty in finding God in their lives originally. Like Francis said that very early on in his life, he really didn't want to become a priest. He just he felt that God was calling him to something more, was calling him to this thing. And Benedict talked about how while he was Pope, he also didn't really feel God with him. But eventually, I think hearing God's voice or just hearing what they think God wants, it really just affected them, and in this case also the entire trajectory of where the church was heading.
Yeah, I feel like one of the reasons that Benedict didn't feel like he had God in his papacy like before the election of Benedict, there was after he was elected, some bishops said, or some cardinals said it was good, and it will cause unity, but others said it would be tearing the church apart. So, like, to have all these different competing ideas coming at you while still trying to like manage the faith of like millions of people, like it's very hard for one person to do alone, which is why like we need more inter-church dialogue and cooperation. And because like if we start spreading out, like, or if we start talking to each other and working together, then we'll make the lives of everyone easier. Because like if like more dialogue, it will help people like Benedict to feel like they have God with them in like a very difficult job that you have as the Pope.
Yeah, I kind of want to, like, that scene is like, I feel like there's so much that happens in that scene. Francis talks about how he was going to marry a woman right before he kind of receives the calling of priesthood. And then there's that little like drop of humor where he's humming Dancing Queen, and then Benedict is kind of ask him what song it is, and it kind of just shows the human aspect like of the Pope and how it's kind of a necessary component of being a successful Pope. Did you guys find that humorous, or did you guys think that had any deeper meaning?
I thought it was like if Benedict didn't like recognize the song, it shows he's kind of like distant from society, and he just like stressed or overwhelmed with like anything else, with everything else, that like he can't even like listen to music in his free time. So yeah, it was kind of like sad to me.
Yeah, I mean, it was like Benedict was playing classical music, right? And classical music is kind of a symbol of like oldness, or like kind of being old, and then Benedict singing Dancing Queen is like being modern. So kind of just like even through like music, they show the opposing sides of what their beliefs are.
No, yeah, I think that was really interesting. I feel like we often see just the popes as like figures of authority, and everything about them just revolves around this. But it was really interesting how they were revealed as humans, and also in like even in their music taste, they may be contrasted. But I think the main thing in that was showing that they truly are human. Like especially also a big part of it for Francis was the idea of him always watching soccer and connecting with other people through that. It's just that it also showed that like Francis was really connected to the people, but then he was also talking to some people. They always said like who cares about Benedict? He doesn't care about us. So that kind of showed the Pope's relationship with the people.
Yeah, kind of like another thing that shows Benedict's kind of like disconnection to like the general public is that he always wanted to eat alone, and it's just kind of like another symbol of how he was a little more detached from the actual like disciples of Christ, and I think that Francis's like connection to the people is one of the most important things that's made him into such a good Pope today. And I just wanted to see what your guys' position was on Francis speaking to the people very personally, how it's good for his reputation, and how it made him such a popular Pope today.
Yeah. So the Pope, you can really see that he originally, even Francis said that originally he didn't really have too many opinions. So he was really the opinion of the people. The movie itself starts with him talking to people in Argentina and just like getting their views on things. Even though he was kind of like not really specifically asking for their views, he had like a general idea of what they wanted. He often like went along with it. It just kind of showed his good relationship with the people, and how he was not that, while yes, reform minded, he was also just kind of had the same mindset of the people.
So kind of like a little bit of a tangent from there, but I think another big piece of the movie is the Argentinian dictatorship and the uprisings happening in the country. What do you guys think Francis' views on this, and what you think? Is it a just war or not?
Well, Francis, he's a man of faith, so I don't think he would support war of any capacity, and especially if it's like a dictatorship. It shows like there's something wrong going on in Argentina right now, like the country is under like a lot of strife. So like I think he obviously doesn't like support the war, and yeah, like as a priest, like it would be his job to try to stop it and like to promote peace instead.
Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, Francis. I think it's pretty clear that he takes like a thing of opposition to the war, and I feel like Benedict's position. Benedict really, he doesn't really seem to care too much about it, even though the dictatorship had happened, and it was pretty much still happening in like Francis's time of talking to him. Benedict seemed to think that it wasn't really his problem because it wasn't really his people, whereas Francis had the stronger connection, wanted for like to help the people.
Yeah. Okay. Another question I kind of had about the opposing views of Benedict and Francis. How do you think the papacy affected Benedict, and how do you think the papacy is currently affecting Francis?
So I think Benedict, we talked about this before. He feels like, Benedict felt really like overwhelmed, and like he has to deal with the faith of like millions of people, and he has to deal with like all these church leaders, and there was honestly a lack of like unity in the church. So that obviously has to be like wearing on him, and he even said himself like he doesn't like feel God with him all the time. So like it's like the dark side to that papacy.
Yeah.
And currently with Francis, I think it's done like something similar to him. Like you can't go from a like a bishop to pope and have like no changes in your life. Like something has to, like you have to feel it a certain way. So I think it's also been hard on him as well. And like the movie showed that too. Like there were issues with him before, and like they wouldn't just go away after he becomes pope.
I think that another thing is like kind of Benedict as Pope. He felt like unreconcilable. Pretty much, he felt that he had done bad, and he told Francis like he had never really owned up to it. So then he confessed to Pope Francis, and I feel like there's really just a big emphasis on like reconciliation throughout the whole movie, and how like the Pope doesn't really seem like the type of person to have to receive it. So that's kind of how like the Pope's figure is seen.
Yeah, I think that reconciliation, such a big part of the movie in Francis's life. What do you think that speaks to Francis's views on his faith, and how it speaks to how the Pope isn't just this figurehead of the church that always knows what's right and always does the right thing? Because obviously reconciliation doesn't mean that you're perfect and that you're free from sin. That means that God recognizes that everybody sins, and it's human nature. But how do you think that it speaks to Francis' life and how he runs the church?
Yeah, so recently Francis has been preaching a lot about like synodality, which is basically him trying to like include the entire church to experience like the synodality. And like what synodality is, I think it's just trying to like promote a lot of more like the interfaith dialogue, and it's like by like definition it's like the life and mission of the church. So he's like spreading the mission of the church to everyone, and that shows that like he sees like what Benedict went through, and he's trying to like not like repeat the past with Benedict, like learn from his mistakes.
Yeah, I think that sinning itself isn't the failure. It's not recognizing that you have sinned and that you need to reconcile is the failure. So I think that like when God looks at you and sees that you sinned, he's merciful, he's forgiving, and then through that mercy and forgiveness, then you can grow and you can move on and you can learn. But if you just sweep all those mistakes and mishaps underneath the rug, you can't grow, you can't move on. So I think that since Francis, who's the figurehead of the church, he is what some view as like the perfect Christian, the perfect Catholic. Him receiving reconciliation just shows that is a necessary part of our faith, and that without it we can't grow, we can't learn, and we can't grow closer to God. So I think that another question we can ask is, who does Francis believe should be let into the church, And who does Benedict believe should be let into the church?
Francis has a much more, I feel like, liberal view on this. He believes that pretty much anyone could be let into the church. You even see him not really arguing, but speaking with Benedict about how he lets people who are considered out of faith to be within the church, such as people who had been supportive of abortion or things like that, things that were considered controversial in the church. Pope Francis kind of just said, it doesn't really matter, they're still children of God. Well, I think Benedict had a pretty much opposite view to that.
Yeah. Okay, so I think my final question, if it's good with you guys, is how does Francis reflect his Ignatian education both before and after he is elected Pope? I think this is a really important question, especially to us, because of our Ignatian education and how it speaks to our faith and our religion. So what do you guys think about this?
Yeah, I thought, especially before he was, in the movie, he was shown to be a really humble and caring person, that really shows with, the Jesuit values. And, what you talk about, is it before and after? Yeah. So, after he was elected Pope, I think he's been really great. Obviously, promoting the mission of the church, and Massimo just said, really letting anyone into the church because they're all children of God. It really speaks to his strong core Ignatian values, and it's really important for a very open person to lead our church, because that way we can reform when it's needed and let everyone in to experience that love of Christ.
I feel like Pope Francis, he pretty much remained just very Ignatian throughout the entire movie. You see him from his very first his really ordainment into the Ignatian way of life, and even through the end where he has become Pope. You see that he's very simplistic. He never asks for very much, even as he's speaking to Benedict and there's a lot being offered. He really just wants just what he needs in order to do what's best. He just wants to be able to speak to the people, hear what they want, and be able to pretty much do what he believes will be best. He never asks for anything more than that. He's not trying to be just out of it and just not do what the people want. He just really wants to reflect his own spirituality through the people.
Yeah, okay, so I think that's a wrap. Thank you guys for speaking about this.
Thank you.
And that's it.